Welcome to me, where suspenseful, thrilling, and mysterious stories will draw you into a world where the lines between reality and fantasy seem to blur. When the night falls, when all the sounds gradually quiet down, leaving only your own heartbeat and breathing, that's when these stories begin. Tensions, unsolved mysteries, moments that will make you hold your breath in fear or curiosity, all are waiting for you ahead. Find a comfortable seat, dim the lights, and let this sound guide you on a journey that is not for the faint of heart. I want each of you to leave a comment sharing where you are in the world. And if you are enjoying the episodes, don't forget to give a like and subscribe to the channel now. Relax. Are you ready? If so, join me in the first story right now. Merry Christmas. Ho, ho, ho. Merry Christmas. Jessica squints her eyes and bites down on her pinkish lower lip. Ho, ho, ho. Merry Christmas. Jessica smiles, wrinkles forming around the corners of her mouth. She shakes her head down and chuckles. Darling, what's the matter? What is going on in that big head of yours? She gets up from her leather office chair and walks to her husband to squeeze his large, cold hands. Jessica's husband has never been so melancholy on December 24th. I'm worried, he shares. About what? Tonight. Jessica was alarmed by her husband's words. In the 4 centuries, her husband has been delivering presents and joy to children all around the world. She has never heard him say those words. What is there to worry about? The elves are organized. Everyone has been getting along. The reindeer are so excited for tonight and full of energy. Rudolph's nose is shining brighter than ever. I think we could shut off the headlights on the sleigh to save energy. Jessica, it's not that. Is it him? What? The Grinch? I do not know what he's up to right now. Jessica searches for the answer in her husband's eyes, but all she sees is her reflection. She drops his hands. Now you are starting to worry me. You need to tell me what is going on, Jessica says sternly. I simply do not know. I just feel unusual. Is it me? Jessica asks. Nicholas doesn't answer. Mr. Claus? Mr. Claus? Jeannie the elf asks aggressively. Nicholas perks up from his dazed state and looks around. All the elves have stopped their work activities to observe the overweight man, normally jolly, sulk in his sleigh. The elves exchange hushed whispers, coated in concern. Not only is this moment instilling fear in them, but the Christmas operation is running behind. Why have you stopped? We need to get going. We need to be in New Zealand in 9 minutes, Nicholas yells. The elves shake at the thunderous volume of his voice and immediately finish packing the last few presents into his enormous red bag and feeding the reindeer their carrots. Nicholas has been delivering presents, or coal for the naughty children, for a few hours now. By the time Nicholas and the reindeer got to Amsterdam, Rudolph's nose was getting dimmer, and he was feeling slight fatigue. But they had to keep going. Nicholas was not singing holiday tunes, as they flew in the crisp, frigid air in Croatia. He even dropped the wrong present, a gaming console, in the wrong house in Nigeria, and had to fly back to little Kemi's house to switch it with the correct one, a skateboard. The reindeer could sense the disorganization and gloominess from Nicholas. Nicholas knew that tonight was more delicate than usual because he was making mistakes for the first time in centuries. His stomach was full of nerves and milk and cookies. 11:55 p.m. CST, Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Nicholas rolls forward and lands on his feet in an upright position, like an Olympic gymnast. His chunky black boots leave faint imprints on the beige carpet. The Christmas lights are still on inside the Alotzi family home, providing light to guide him towards the Christmas tree. He places 3 gifts: a bicycle for Kechi, 8, a basketball hoop for Leon, 10, and a limited edition comic book for Josiah, 12. Nicholas smiles. A sense of peace washes over him, a feeling he has not felt all day. Josiah is the oldest, and he recently started to lose vision in his right eye. It has changed how he plays with his friends and how he learns his favorite subjects in school. But he was an exceptionally good boy this year. He deserves that comic book. That's what it's all about for Nicholas. Bringing joy to children. Nicholas looks around the cozy living room, looking for cookies and milk. With nothing in sight to quench his thirst or hunger, he walks towards the kitchen. This family is well off, he thinks to himself. Big white cabinets, stainless steel appliances, large square footage, pristine, clean, quiet. Milk and cookies wait for him on the large rectangular wooden dining table. Nicholas sips on the milk. He can see the family's new silver barbecue grill sitting outside the back door through the sliding door windows. The right side of the sliding door looked damaged. The white siding is bent and cracked, so much for pristine. As he put the tall glass of milk down, his head became hot. Sweat started to form from underneath his red hat. Something is not right, he thought. The milk was hot, steaming as if someone had just warmed it up just before he got there. Police! Put your hands where we can see them. Before Nicholas could turn around, he was tackled to the ground by an unknown man. Get off of me! He screams in agony. Nicholas, unable to lift his head to see ahead of him, hears more footsteps. An army of footsteps come from several positions in the kitchen. Doors swing open. Wooden chairs are toppled over. Bright flashlights illuminate his face. Nicholas feels his breath weaken and starts heaving. All right, officer. No need to suffocate him, a voice says. Nicholas feels a weight lift off his back and is finally able to lift his head. Officers dressed in thick, dark-colored bulletproof vests, masks, weapons, and boots surround the kitchen. St. Nicholas, You are under arrest for trespassing, breaking and entering, animal abuse, and violating the labor code. 2 officers appear beside him to bring him to his feet and start to cuff his hands behind his back. "These are preposterous claims," Nicholas exclaims. "Sir, anything you say may be used against you in court. You have the right to remain silent." "I am not a criminal. I am Santa Claus." Nicholas wiggles frantically in his cuffs. "If you arrest me, millions of children will not get their Christmas presents. I need to finish my job. Can I speak to your superior? Who is responsible for placing these charges against me?" A sinister silence comes. The officers turn their faces away from the now red-faced Nicholas towards a corner of the kitchen. The pantry, it opens with a creak, and a quiet, cold breeze sweeps through the kitchen. A trapped cry can be heard in the large pantry. Nicholas's eyes cannot believe what he is seeing. A mother, stepfather, and 3 kids, the Alozi family, are bound together, not with the joyful spirit of Christmas, but by dry, brown rope. Their mouths taped shut. Not a word from their lips, but their eyes do the talking. Desperation and fear reeks from the sweat that covers their heads. Nicholas screams and tries to free himself from the restraint of the handcuffs, but the officers hold him back. "I wouldn't try that if I were you," a familiar voice sounds, but Nicholas cannot quite put a finger on it. The unknown figure's boots make loud thuds on the floor as they walk closer to Nicholas. The other officers part themselves like the Red Sea and make way for them. A cap shades her face in the low-lit kitchen, but Nicholas can make out her shiny, blonde hair. "Cindy," she slowly lifts her head. "Hello, Santa Claus?" "Cindy Lou, what is the meaning of all of this?" Nicholas asks. "Little Cindy Lou, who, from Whoville, sports a black jumpsuit and an unauthorized police badge. Her eyes are black with deceit and evil. A distant image from the small girl who loved Christmas. Cindy, please, remember the day the Grinch stole Christmas? How painful that was for you and your town. Imagine the millions of children experiencing the same thing this Christmas right now. Is that what you want?" Nicholas pleads. Cindy leans closer to Nicholas. "It's not about what I want, Claus. Are these officers even legitimate? Cindy Lou, answer me. And why tie this poor family up on Christmas Eve?" The eyes of the smallest Alozi child, Keiichi, beg for freedom. "Actually," Cindy Lou checks her watch, "it's Christmas Day, and it's about what he gets." Nicholas smells a grisly scent, and immediately his eyes open wide. A masked figure appears from a clump of officers. He gently removes his mask and reveals his skin, all green, and teeth, all yellow with termites. "I should have known better," Nicholas whispers to himself. "Merry Christmas, Santa Claus." Nicholas is enraged. Veins start to pop from his neck. Why so sad, Santy? What happened to the holly jolly fat man with a white beard that everyone knows and loves? Let me go. Now. No, 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 no can do, Santy. Nicholas uses his large body to push the officers, if they even are real Canadian authorities, off him. They fall to the ground, but Nicholas is still surrounded by several angry officers, ready to take him down. Cindy waves her gloved finger, instructing the officers to pounce on Father Christmas. A struggle ensues, and Nicholas is forced to the ground again. He fights with all his will, yelling and kicking with the most power an almost 2,000-year-old man could. "Stop resisting," one officer demands. "You need to comply, sir," another one says. "Punch his fat belly if you need to. Or even better, kick his head," Cindy commands. Nicholas weakly lifts his head, and his fearful eyes drift towards the vile, green-skinned monster beside Cindy. He shows all his 55 crooked, revolting teeth. A bad banana. "Suspect has his hand on a weapon," the monster shouts. Nicholas furrows his bushy eyebrows in confusion. He thinks to himself, "I do not have my hand on a green Glock 17 appears between Nicholas's eyes, and it fierce with a deafening rumble. "Ho, ho, ho, Merry Christmas," the Grinch hollers, foreboding. It was all too much, really. The woman and the boy dragged their tired legs through the deep snow. Ahead of them, far off in the distance, lay the undulating, snow-covered hills where the log cabin they were heading for had been built many years previously. The two could picture in their minds a blazing fire and hot chocolate with little marshmallows floating on the surface, and it was this that kept them going. The boy, a young teenager, often had to support the woman and help her across fallen trees that hampered their progress. The woman was exhausted, and every few minutes she stopped, leaning heavily over her knees, trying desperately to catch her breath. The boy stopped with her every time, but his eyes kept traveling anxiously across the vast expanse of land they had to cross to reach their goal. Being younger and fitter, he didn't need as many breaks as the woman did, but he never complained. It was more important for him to bring the woman back alive than to force her to walk faster. They set off again, the woman hanging on to the boy's arm. The surface underneath them suddenly turned slippery. They had reached the frozen lake finally. There was still a long way to go, but at least there were no hills or fallen trees to navigate. The woman stopped again. Her breathing was labored, and she had trouble drawing a deep enough breath to regain some strength. She was crying from the exhaustion. The boy knelt down and held her. His face was worried and concerned. His hands shook somewhat as he gently patted the woman's back. A man walked past in a sideways manner, like a crab. He waved at the pair and smiled. The woman stretched out a hand towards the man, imploringly, and the boy gave him a surly look. But the man just smiled again and continued through the deep snow. He wore only one snowshoe, which explained his strange gait, but it didn't seem to hamper his progress. He flattened the snow with his snowshoe-clad foot and hardly sunk through the snow at all. With the other foot, the woman looked at the flattened snow and then looked up at the boy. He smiled at her. At least there would now be an easier path for them to use. The woman straightened up and, sensing renewed vigor, pulled the boy to his feet. They hugged, took each other's hand, and started walking again. Ahead of them, the man continued his crab walk, humming a monotonous tune that sounded more like a low rumble than anything else. He turned his head, saw them walking behind him, and motioned for them to follow, nodding his head encouragingly. As the man forged ahead in front of them, the distance between them and him grew. The man was walking unnaturally fast, considering the conditions and his unconventional gait, and the boy grew anxious. He tried to walk faster to keep up, and the distance between him and the woman increased unrelentingly. She called his name, but he seemed oblivious. He had his eyes firmly on the man, who was now barely visible far ahead of them, and did not stop when the woman needed a break again. She called him feebly, but she had no strength to raise her voice. She cried again, cursing her tired legs and laboring lungs. Once more, she bent over her knees, trying to catch her breath. She wanted to scream. She wanted to beg the boy to wait, but no words could be heard. A flutter on the wind, a change in the vibrations another human being causes when they disturb the airflow, caused her to look up. The boy was no longer visible from her vantage point, bent double over her knees. She straightened up quickly, her heart beating faster. Where was the boy? Squinting to look in front of her, she suddenly saw his head pop up, arms flailing, and then disappear again. Her heart fell into her stomach. He had gone through the ice. Finding a strength she didn't know she had, the woman ran. The snow was deep and felt like syrup. She screamed in frustration and then called the boy's name. As she got closer, she slowed down, walking fast but carefully towards the boy. He was bobbing up and down again, waving his arms, but he made no sound. The cold water had robbed him of his voice, and his open mouth, so poignant in his horrified face, only mimicked the sound he was trying to make. Suddenly, he disappeared again, and only his hand was sticking up over the snow. The woman, no longer trying to be cautious, threw herself down on the ice and found his hand. Seconds before, it would have disappeared under the water. She felt the boy grabbing the hand, and she pulled, the adrenaline and fear giving her more strength than she had ever had before. The boy's head appeared again, he looked straight at the woman, and there was a panic in his eyes that scared her more than anything else. She noticed that there wasn't much room for his head, and with a jolt of fear, she realized the fissure in the ice was closing up, and fast. The boy's head disappeared under the water again, despite her holding on to his hand, and the hole kept closing. Now, there was no way the boy could get his head through the hole to draw breath again, and she screamed in fear and panic. With her free hand, she started pounding on the ice around the hole. The ice was too hard, and her frail beating could not even chip away at the surface. Keeping a firm hold on the hand that still gripped hers convulsively, she tried bashing a hole in the ice with the heel of one boot, but the ice would not even crack. The boy's hand started losing its grip on her hand, and she wailed in desperation, stomping harder on the ice, standing up to add weight to the pounding on the ice. She lost her grip on the boy's hand, and it slipped below the water, the hole finally closing inexorably around it with a sucking sound, far away from the location in her dream. The woman woke up sobbing, sweat moistening her forehead, and shaking from head to toe. A pain in her chest so intense it brought tears to her eyes. The woman tried taking a deep breath. She was moaning, and her heart was beating so rapidly it hurt. Next to her, her husband was snoring loudly, completely oblivious to her plight. This was nothing new. It would more than likely take an earthquake to wake him up at this hour, and she didn't need him anyway. She gently pushed the blankets aside and slipped out of bed. She had to make sure he was safe. The dream had been so vivid, so real. Tiptoeing across the hall, shivering slightly in the cold night air that permeated the house, she arrived in her older son's bedroom. A soft snoring could be heard from the room. As she neared, a quiet meow greeted her. Looking into the room, the lamp-like eyes of their cat Brandy were staring back at her, and the animal meowed quietly again. Letting her breath out, she hadn't even been aware of holding it. She tiptoed over to stroke the cat gently. "Good girl, you stay with him. Keep him safe for me." Looking down upon her teenage son, his mouth open and his wavy hair in disarray around his peaceful face, she felt her throat constrict slightly, and she had to swallow hard to stifle the moan that had almost escaped her mouth again. The dream was still so alive in her mind, and the sense of foreboding was making her eyes water, her chest aching so much she was afraid it would burst open. Wanting desperately to wake him up just to hold him, she instead stretched her hand out, stroking her son's forehead gently before retreating out into the hall again. Feeling compelled to check on her younger son as well, she continued down the hall to the third bedroom. He was sleeping on top of his covers, his little thumb securely lodged in his mouth. She could tell he was cold as he was curled up in a fetal position, and she carefully tugged the blanket out from under him, covering his little body and tucking it in around the sides of the bed. There was no point in going back to bed now. She was wide awake, and in less than an hour and a half, she would have to be up to help the kids get ready for school. She tiptoed past her husband, still in his bed, snoring loudly, to grab her bathrobe, and then snuck downstairs to make a cup of tea. Sunlight was forcing its way into her kitchen when she arrived back downstairs, penetrating dusty corners and pushing through a curtain of tiny dust particles that had been stirred up as she grabbed a tea towel to wipe the cup. And she sat down at the kitchen table, carefully sipping a steaming cup of Earl Grey. She still felt cold inside, shivering slightly, even as the warm liquid made its way to her empty stomach. The image of her son's head disappearing under the ice in her dream, still so clear in her mind, it was making her shake her head repeatedly, as if to rid herself of an annoying fly. She was wringing her hands, moaning quietly every time she saw the hand disappearing under the ice in her mind's eye. Would she ever be able to forget this dream? Little tiny clicks on the kitchen floor told her that Brandy had decided to join her in the kitchen. The cat looked up at the woman as she rounded the kitchen island on her way to her food bowl, but seemed entirely intent on wanting to satisfy her hunger for food before satisfying other needs, such as attention from her human owner. And she beat her regular path right over to her food bowl without stopping. The bowl was empty, accusing feline eyes locked into hers. Brandy sat down, looked back at her bowl, and then up again at the woman. It was obvious that the cat was asking for food, but the woman, who was still feeling faint from her nightmare, seemed oblivious. A soft meow mingled with a purr escaped the tiny mouth as the cat stood back up again and sauntered over. Wrapping herself around the human legs, she began a relentless meowing until the woman finally surrendered and got up off her chair to feed the cat. That's when she saw it. Next to the canister where they kept the cat's food, there was a pile of unopened and unchecked mail from the day before. On the top, underneath a blue envelope, apparently sent out by Publishers Clearinghouse, she was probably about to win $5,000 a week for life, was something white. She realized that she was looking at a picture of snow, and with trepidation and horrific foreboding, she pulled the catalog out from under the envelope. It was a magazine on vacation cottages in northern Maine. Her husband had been canvassing for this vacation for months and had obviously ordered the catalog. And on the front was a picture of a rustic-looking cabin with snowdrifts lapping the windows. In the background, a frozen lake could be seen. The woman caught her breath and felt her knees buckle. Next to the cabin, locking eyes with her from the picture, stood the man from her dream, smiling benignly, holding his hand out towards the cottage. In his other hand, he was holding one snowshoe. Mercifully, darkness enveloped her, and she escaped. For a while. It was all too much, really. Cliffhanger by Lee Kendrick. I had never been to a tropical country before, but Indonesia was my friend's, and I chose a holiday destination after we had scanned the internet for tropical countries. We all agreed to go to the Indonesian island of Sumba, an island as large as Jamaica. Apparently, Indonesia boasts the most islands of any country. Unbelievably, over 17,000. My friends Michael, Bob, and I, Dave, had booked a holiday here for 2 weeks. We planned to do some snorkeling, exploring the coral reefs, and go on some boat trips to some of the Indonesian islands. For now, we were just chilling out on a sun lounger, drinking cold beers on the white sands of the Mbawana beach. The Sumba Island landscape is so rich in exotic plants and animal life. It also boasts unusual rock formations, including the Halfling Giant Stone. This is a coastal rock with a large gaping hole through it. In fact, me and the boys are just 30 feet away from it, to our left. Another unusual thing about Indonesia is the Indian Ocean. It changes color, varying from turquoise to ultramarine blue to a remarkable golden orange. Another thing this part of the world is known for is its earthquakes and tsunamis. Just a few minutes ago, we felt a heavy earthquake, but this was normal for Indonesia. We were glad we weren't in a city full of buildings. The tremor only lasted for about 20 seconds, and then it just fizzled out. Nothing to worry about. Feeling hot, I decided to go for a dip in the ocean. As I slowly walked in the soft, powdery white sand towards the ocean, I sensed a foreboding. And for some reason, I noticed it was taking me longer than usual at this time of day to arrive by the ocean. I also observed pools of seawater with seaweed, crabs, and other sea creatures, which weren't there before. And I'm sure by now I would have been hearing the waves come crashing onto the beach. But the ocean seems much further away. Then it dawned on me as I stared out into the distance. There it was, a few miles away, a massive wall of water. Difficult to measure, but I would say it must be at least 50 feet high, and it was heading towards the beach. It was a tsunami. I had heard in documentaries about how the ocean suddenly withdraws from a beach, heralding a tsunami. Is this my time to die? I thought. I turned and ran as fast as I could, back towards my friends, wearing my stupid flip-flops. As I ran, I observed dozens of people lying on their beach towels, oblivious to what was about to happen. I attempted to shout to warn them, but no words would come from my mouth. I was unable to speak because I was in the grip of fear. I managed to attract a couple's attention, but they just waved back at me and continued sunbathing. I picked up a heavy shell and threw it at them, and then pointed frantically towards the wall of death. I ran and ran, painfully slowly, getting closer towards my friends. Then my friends Michael and Bob saw me. I waved with both hands, frantically in desperation, to try and warn them as I pointed back to the ocean. They just seemed to ignore me. Finally, I reached Michael and Bob to pull them away. My larynx was constricted, paralyzed. I couldn't utter one word as I pointed back towards the ocean. A bloody, gigantic blue-green wave was only a couple of 100 yards away. By now, there were people screaming everywhere on the beach. We all started running. But where? Where do we go? Do you climb a tree? The waves are too high. Do we try to outrun it? No. It's too close behind us, and it must be moving at over 100 per now. Do we go left or right? Maybe the wave isn't as long as the beach. Very unlikely we could escape. It probably stretches as far as the length of the beach. We kept on running in front for our lives. As the adrenaline coursed through our veins, I spotted the cliff some 50 yards away. The tsunami was now so close behind us, you could hear its thunderous roar, like a wild beast after its prey. As we managed to reach the cliff, we climbed as rapidly as we could, managing some 30 feet, when the wave crashed heavily into the cliff. It demolished the halfling giant stone and engulfed the surrounding area. The beach had been swallowed up, and the ocean continued to climb, moving closer towards us. This wild beast wasn't done until it caught up with us, all three of us, now exhausted, and like a gazelle, tired out with all its energy, spent. It was ready to drop and resign its fate to the beast chasing after it. I knew it was just only seconds away before the wave would claim me and my two friends. Suddenly, my heart stopped beating. To my horror, I was unable to lift my leg up to a ledge. It had got entangled in some plant's tendrils. Bob and Michael were too busy escaping to not notice me in trouble. The water was now up to my ankles as I frantically moved my foot to budge it free. The boat just wouldn't move. By now, I resigned to the fact that I was going to drown. As a 26-year-old, I was hoping for longer on this earth, and I just wish Bob and Michael escaped the wave. The water was now rising up to my neck. I closed my eyes and saw flash images of my mother, dad, sister, and brother. But wait a moment. Why hasn't the water covered me yet? I thought. The next thing I noticed was the water level was going down. It was now down to my feet, and I was able now to budge my foot free. The water was drawing slowly away, down to where the ocean and beach would normally meet. I looked up to the top of the cliff, and there, looking down, were my two buddies, Michael and Bob, waving to me, laughing. We all had a miracle escape. Sadly, many tourists didn't, and the man in the lake. Since I was a child, I've feared him deeply, though I've never laid eyes upon his elusive person. I can remember vividly walking along the narrow trail that surrounded Lake Victory during the Ides of October. The water, dormant and as reflective as glass, was enraged by the fiery reds of the perishing leaves that clung desperately to the maples surrounding it. If you glanced from a distance, you'd think it was a pit of lava scorching through the center of the earth from the leaves that already pirouetted to the ground. A magnificent blanket of gold and orange stretched invitingly along at your feet. Consequently, as the trees became more barren, the seasonal breeze squeezed between the branches, knocking together their nimble limbs. With its powerful grasp, the whooshing breath of Mother Nature would envelop all sounds within an ear's distance of man. This type of silence was cathartic. If you closed your eyes, you could become coalesced with its gentle movement, as a spider web would become accessorized against the unbeknownst skin. The random assortment of sounds stemming from birds, the splashing of fish, an acorn falling from the tree, the ominous sounds of swaying, narrow trees like a rusted seesaw, or the mercurial patter of rain echoing against the wilted leaves, producing a light bass that was rhythmically harmonious to the ear. My grandfather always mentioned this man was always present, but you had to search persistently without fear or a cluttered mind. There was always talk of a dock, though the far side of the lake was unrecognizable from the conception, with its bends and curves to and from sight. He always said, not many find this man in Lake Victory, that it takes a special kind of person to gain his trust. The man was full of wisdom, distinguished, and had the ultimate answer to life's enigmas, he claimed. That he had experienced the greatest challenges man can face. I used to circle this lake frequently as a child, climbing trees for a better view, skipping rocks to alert him of my presence, and whatever other racket I could concoct to make myself evident as far as I could muster the courage to. Of course, this came to no avail. In my mind, the imagery of this man had always changed. Some days, he would be terrifyingly tall, his limbs slender, and his eyes were always hidden underneath a low-positioned straw hat. Other days, he would have a becoming face, accentuated by a tinge of red from physical exertion. I pictured him growing corn in small patches, picking berries from wild bushes, and fishing regularly from his forsaken dock. A fire would be ablaze during his nights, where he would sit complacently, listening to the crickets and the sounds of night. As I went through high school and college, the distraction and monotony of life had guided me far away from Lake Victory in search of material things, to chase a dream enriched by hollow rapacity. My family's vacation home had become a distant memory. I no longer needed to acquaint this man during the fall, because he no longer could fill the void inside of my heart as he would in my youth. Or so I thought. I figured that new quest, with all the goals I had set for myself to accomplish, would provide far more solace than the man in the lake. I riddled myself with distraction, so much so I was afraid to be alone with my own thoughts, praying my responsibilities and egocentric monsters that loomed behind would never catch up to my incessant steps and thoughts. However, when things that provide no internal peace reach an expulsion point, there comes the burnout. It wasn't until I was 37 that for the first time in my life, I began to feel the weight of time bearing down upon my slouched and exhausted shoulders. It was quite amazing when I returned, how the lake had never lost its luster. However, it is also true that not many know of this lake's whereabouts. Furthermore, it would be bizarre to even encounter another bystander in your journeys around its trail. It wasn't long before I started to realize that the wonderful colors that encapsulate nature never truly lose its vigor. Only the mud-made things in life itself begin to fade as your optimism and naivety of being young dissipates as you embrace the harsh realities of existence. The future remembers history in black and white, though those who lived it always can revisit the palette that painted their peaks, whether the ravishing color of their wives' eyes when they first met, the color of their first vehicle sitting, sparkling in the driveway, or his father's blue flannel shirt, always rolled up to the elbow as he returned home from work. I remember spotting the rays of the sun streaming through the naked branches, placing my hand within its warm consultation like I did as a child. My pallid flesh began to glow as an orb would, the light bending around and through my stretched fingers as I tried to ball it up and capture it within my selfish fist. The trees, though still gallant and strong, were showing signs of age then. Their bark had become brittle and fissured. The base of some of these trees had become cavernous, offering safe haven for the smaller critters. I reflected on my own appearance, with the subtle lines beginning to formulate below and beside the eyes, the random sprouts of gray hair poking through my sideburns, and the pouch of flesh that had grown dormant around my waist. I, too, was succumbing to life's greatest guarantee, and I reflected upon my mortality as I rested my hand against the withering bark in passing. The man in the lake must be growing old. It was then that again I was enlivened by the man himself as I began to intake the fresh air. Surely in my adulthood, I could find this man, who must be very old himself, and not as evasive as he was many, many years before. Those creaks and snapping of branches under the light prancing of the deer would set my heart ablaze, gawking maniacally and frozen still, hoping to finally catch a glimpse of this folklore. The ground was still forgiving to my steps, still fecund from the week's rain, and my soles glided effortlessly across the discarded tapestry of leaves as they did when I was young. And through certain partitions between the blinding trees, you could catch a swooping heron, the elongated neck, saintly patience, and aloof demeanor, awaiting the perfect moment to spear its beak into unsuspecting prey, just as they had in early summers. I remember the trail was as underutilized as ever at 37, stumbling atop exposed roots and stubbing my toe against jagged rock. I had been swimming through the thickets, gently whipped by the returning force, though I continued to push further than I'd ever had as a child. It wasn't long then before that allure and optimism that guided my clairvoyance towards the man in the lake previously was becoming shrouded by the enclosing nature surrounding my steps. Briefly, I remembered pausing within a small pocket of land, like an atrium within the center of the forest, and weighed my options going forward. I concluded that maybe my grandfather made up this man in the lake, that maybe I knew this all along and held on to this anecdote like one holds on to an old shirt from his past, attached to the memories it harnessed. It was then I turned towards the trail where I had come from. Then I craned my neck towards the hazardous continuance just ahead. Something within was battling, opposing forces destined for different destinies, though I allowed my city-wrought mind to win the battle once again. I turned back towards my vehicle, leaving the man behind once again. Now, I am 79. I've raised children, paid off my mortgage, made all the money one can make to live a satisfied life. However, something was gnawing in the confines of my mind. The man in the lake. Here I was again. The trail was non-existent now, but I allowed what was left of my memory to guide me towards my former footsteps upon weakened limbs. Some of the trees now had fallen, and Lake Victory was as exposed as it ever had been, as I gingerly stepped around the detriments of my journey. In brief increments, the past would flash before my eyes, and through my childhood eyes, I was allotted the opportunity to see Lake Victory in all of its former glory. My breathing was heavy, my hands calloused as I tightly grasped my walking stick. My calves were aching tremendously, though my heart thumped with the excitement and fervency of a teen. I knew this was my last opportunity. The fall always seemed to leave me speechless. How could it be? Something that I've witnessed dozens of times still enraged my love for this very earth, just as it had the first time. It was the essence of beauty, natural, pure in all of its forms, and I was appreciative that it only climaxed for a few weeks. Things of such enchantment are usually ephemeral, undeserving of the burden of obsolescence. The woman you meet in a foreign land, gone before you awake in the morning. The feeling on a motorcycle, with your hair in the wind, barely avoiding death, and the war cry that follows, with your heart nearly shattering your rib cage. It was superior to all because it was effortless. It was the cycle of life itself. The atrium was still present, though it had shrunken to barely enough room for an elderly man such as myself. This time, I trudged through the webbing of branches and shrubbery, my face becoming sliced, and my hands bloodied by their sharp teeth. I could see the sun breaking through, about 20 feet ahead. This must have been where the man lived. I broke through the remaining brush, out into an open field. The purple and yellow flowers arched from their nesting spots, swallowed by the remaining green of October that survived by a water source. I looked upwards, glad to see the sun, receptive to its blanketing of my worn flesh. Then I looked towards the water once again, and there it was, the aforementioned dock. However, I was now forlorn, spotting no cabin in the woods, nor anywhere that a man could survive in such circumstances. I did not see his corn, nor his burn pit, where he spent his nights. I've spent my whole life, in retrospect, always comparing myself to the man in the lake, his humble attitude, his love for nature, his ability to acquire happiness without material things. His lore kept me grounded to reality. And now I was faced with the harsh truth that his existence was never crafted by veracity. Nor was this apotheosis one in which I dreamed many times before. I harped upon why my grandfather would speak so greatly of him, as if a friend. Why allow me to go on these wild goose chases, hoping to encounter some begrimed being, steeped in desolation? I approached the dock apprehensively, acknowledging its worn and derelict bones, the way it slouched towards the right side, and how the algae grew rampantly across its damp surface. I took a careful step and stopped, now hearing the lapping water gently clapping against the embankment, taking along with it the atrophied leaves, as a Viking would be sent off during his death. I took another step, stopping once again, surprised by the stability with a poke of my stick, and then decided upon shuffling towards the very edge. Here I stood, looking out over the lake that had held such a prized position within my heart. I looked down towards the surface of my hands, with all of the wrinkles and liver spots that come regretfully with age. Then I looked around the lake, witnessing its vitality once again. I understood that though some of the trees would tumble, that this very dock itself will eventually surrender to entropy, that the man in the lake may have been a farce, that ultimately I was eternally grateful for everything it had provided me in my life. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, feeling the brisk air searching through my lungs. As I exhaled greatly, there was a surge of enlightenment that had imbued a deep revelation just as I had opened my eyes. And it was at this moment I knew I had found the man in the lake. As I looked down, just ahead of the last portion of the dock, I saw my reflection within the still water. The white hair that whisked away with the gentlest of breezes. The thick, clouded glasses that stretched across my eyes. My hunched disposition, barely holding up underneath my trembling legs. This fascinating search for a character that had lived deep within all of our souls. One stripped bare of the repressed angst and uncertainty that haunted us all outside of this mystical place. With all of its simplicity and understanding of life that one tends to convolute upon their odyssey towards enlightenment. This was the ultimate lesson, and it took a lifetime to understand. I was the man in the lake, just as my grandpa had once been, and maybe one day you will be too. The day Los Angeles. Changed Sophia's spoon clinked against porcelain as she stirred her tea, the sound barely audible beneath the morning bustle of the morning brew. Outside the window, autumn painted the small town of San Bernardino in shades of amber and gold. So different from Los Angeles, where even fall seemed reluctant to interrupt the city's relentless energy. "You're stirring that tea to death," her mother observed, eyes crinkling with gentle humor. "Still not sleeping well?" Sophia looked up, caught in the act. Serenity Williams had always possessed an uncanny ability to read her daughter, even as cancer steadily claimed her strength. Today was a good day. Her mother sat upright without assistance, her silver-streaked hair neatly combed, her smile warm despite the hollowness in her cheeks. "Claire's having nightmares again," Sophia admitted. "And Mark's firm is restructuring, which means longer hours. I'm not sure this was the right time to visit, even for a weekend." Serenity reached across the table, her hand light but steady as it covered Sophia's. "There's never a perfect time for anything important. You're here now. That's what matters." The cafe hummed around them, baristas calling out orders, the espresso machine hissing, customers tapping away at their laptops or scrolling through their phones. On a wall-mounted television, the morning news rolled through its predictable cycle. Political tensions, economic forecasts, celebrity gossip. The scent of fresh coffee and baked goods wrapped around them like a familiar blanket. "Tell me more about Claire's school play," Serenity prompted, taking a careful sip from her cup. "You said she landed the lead role?" Sophia's face brightened. "She's playing Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. You should see her practicing somewhere over the rainbow around the house. Mark recorded her last rehearsal. I can show you." Her words trailed off as the cafe's television caught her attention. The news had switched to a traffic helicopter shot over Los Angeles. A routine segment showing the morning gridlock. The reporter's voice carried over footage of the 405 freeway, mentioning construction delays near Westwood, where Mark worked. Expect those delays to continue through the afternoon rush hour. Alternative routes are advised for. The screen flashed white. For a fraction of a second, Sophia thought it was a technical glitch. Then the blinding light resolved into something else, as two massive fireballs erupted over the Los Angeles skyline, twin terrifying mushroom clouds climbing into the atmosphere. The helicopter camera jolted violently, the image spinning as the reporter's voice cut off mid-sentence, static. Then, blackness. The morning brew fell silent. Every conversation halted mid-word. Every movement suspended. For 3 long seconds, no one breathed. Sophia felt the world contract to a pinpoint. Sophia let slip a tiny gasp. Her coffee cup slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering against the floor. But she couldn't hear it. All she could see was that burning flower blossoming over her home, over Mark, over Claire. "Sophia," her mother's voice seemed to come from miles away. "Sophia, look at me." Sophia couldn't move, couldn't blink. At a loss for words, her body had turned to stone while her mind screamed. Around them, the stunned silence fractured. Someone gasped. A man at the counter swore loudly. A barista fumbled for the remote control, frantically changing channels. Each station showed variations of the same nightmare: emergency broadcasts, confused anchors, footage of the explosion from different angles. What appears to be at least 2 nuclear detonations over Los Angeles. No official statement yet from authorities, advising all residents to shelter in place. Sophia's phone vibrated in her pocket. Her heart leapt. Mark? Claire? But when she pulled it out with trembling fingers, the screen displayed only an emergency alert. National emergency declared. Shelter in place. Await further instructions. She stared at the message, its cold, bureaucratic tone at odds with the catastrophe unfolding. Desperately, she tried calling Mark's number. Nothing. She tried Claire's phone. Nothing again. Each attempt met with the same automated message. All circuits are currently busy. Please try your call again later. That sterile, mechanical voice seemed to mock her panic. All circuits busy. As if this were just another holiday, with too many calls being placed at once. As if her world hadn't just collapsed into ash. Around them, the cafe erupted into chaos. People scrambled for phones, for exits, for any semblance of control. A businessman shouted into his dead cell about evacuations. A college student sobbed openly into her hands. The barista continued flipping channels frantically, as if one might suddenly offer reassurance. "Is it just LA?" someone demanded. "Are there other cities?" "My sister's in San Diego," a woman cried. "She's not answering. The terrorists might have finally developed a nuke." No, it's gotta be an accident. Nuclear war, man. The Chinese, the Russians. Outside, ancient, long disused air raid sirens began to wail. Through the window, Sophia could see people rushing down the sidewalks, some toward their cars, others seemingly without direction. A police cruiser sped past, lights flashing. Sophia's thoughts whirled like debris in a tornado. Mark and Claire, 12 miles from downtown Los Angeles. Was that close enough to the blasts? Had Mark gotten to Claire's school in time? Were they trying to leave the city or shelter in place? The questions multiplied, each more terrifying than the last. The spell binding Sophia's tongue broke, and she could finally speak. "I have to go back," she whispered, then louder. "I have to go back to LA." Her mother's grip tightened around her wrist. "Sophia, breathe. Think. They need me." Panic clawed at Sophia's throat. "I need to find them. Look at the TV," Serenity said firmly. Look, the television now showed aerial footage of highways leading out of Los Angeles. Gridlock, unlike anything Sophia had ever seen. Thousands of vehicles at a standstill, some abandoned as people continued on foot. The military conspicuously absent from every possible scene, advising against attempting to enter the Los Angeles metro area. Radiation concerns as far as 40 miles from the blast sites. National Guard has been activated. Sophia's phone buzzed again with the same emergency alert. National emergency declared. Shelter in place. Await further instructions. "I can't just sit here," Sophia hissed, tears finally breaking through her shock. "Mom, I can't." Serenity pulled herself up straighter, summoning strength that shouldn't have been possible in her frail body. When she spoke, her voice cut through the cafe's panic with surprising authority. "Listen to me, Sophia Ayala Williams. Your fear wants you to run, but running blind is how people get killed in disasters." She took Sophia's trembling hands in hers. "Breathe first, think second, act third. You taught Claire that, remember? When she gets overwhelmed, the mention of her daughter's name sent fresh pain through Sophia's chest, but she forced herself to inhale deeply. Once, twice. Her mother's eyes held hers, anchoring her to the moment. "Mark is smart," Serenity continued. "He knows to get Claire somewhere safe. He knows you're here with me. You charging into a nuclear disaster zone helps no one. But what if? No what ifs yet. Facts first. What do we know?" Despite herself, Sophia felt her analytical mind begin to engage. There were 2 explosions over Los Angeles. People were leaving the city, but the military does not seem to be reacting yet. There looked like a massive area of LA leveled by the explosion. Good. What else? Roads are jammed. The military will soon be blocking entry. There might be radiation. The reality of that word hit her anew, and she swallowed hard. Communications are overloaded, with everyone trying to check on their loved ones. The news cut to a press briefing where the perky smile of the blonde, blue-eyed, and comely presidential press secretary, incongruent to the chaos erupting, confirmed what everyone already knew. 2 nuclear devices had detonated over Los Angeles. Origin unknown. Casualty estimates pending. Military response underway. The potential for additional attacks could not be ruled out. "And does everyone like my new lip gloss?" the press secretary asked. "I can't just wait here," Sophia whispered. "I can't." Serenity studied her daughter's face. "No, you can't. But you need a plan, not panic." For the next hour, as the world unraveled around them, Sophia and her mother remained at their table. The cafe transformed into an impromptu crisis center for the customers. The owner turned up the television volume, distributed free coffee, and allowed people to charge phones on every available outlet. Information trickled in. The blasts had occurred over downtown Los Angeles. Early estimates suggested the devices were relatively small by nuclear standards. Tactical nukes, like the RSM-56 Bulava, rather than strategic nuclear weapons. But devastating nonetheless. Sophia tried every communication method she could think of. Calls, texts, emails, and social media messages. Most failed, but occasionally a text would go through, only to receive no response. She left voice messages that grew increasingly desperate. "I'm coming to find you. Wait for me. I love you both." Outside, the town of San Bernardino transformed. Police directed traffic at intersections. Lines formed at gas stations. The grocery store across the street was mobbed. People hugged strangers or argued violently about what to do next. And through it all, Serenity remained calm, her presence a counterweight to the mounting hysteria. She helped Sophia gather information, separating facts from rumors, while conserving her limited energy. "The radiation reports are mixed," Sophia noted, scanning emergency updates on her tablet. "Some areas might be relatively safe, especially with proper precautions. And Mark knows this, Serenity reminded her. He'll get Claire to safety if he can. If he can. The words hung between them, unaddressed. By mid-afternoon, Sophia had made her decision. She would return to Los Angeles, not in blind panic, but with purpose and preparation. Her mother didn't try to dissuade her. She recognized the determination in her daughter's eyes. "I'll be back for you," Sophia promised as she prepared to leave. "Once I find them, we'll all come back here." Serenity smiled sadly. "I know you will." She pressed something into Sophia's hand, a small silver locket containing a family photo. For luck, the drive that should have taken over an hour stretched before Sophia like an impossible gauntlet. Roads would be clogged. Gas might be scarce. And at the end waited either reunion or devastation. "I love you, Mom," she whispered, embracing Serenity carefully, conscious of her fragility. "Find them," Serenity replied simply. "Be smart. Be safe." As Sophia's car pulled away from the morning brew, Serenity Williams watched from the window. Sophia touched her fingers to the glass in silent farewell, praying that her mother, Serenity, and her daughter, Claire, would forgive her for the choice she'd been forced to make today. Between the mother who was dying and the family who might already be gone. The afternoon shadows grew long as Sophia's car raced along the westbound interstate back to Los Angeles. The main highways heading east had quickly become impassable, choked with the vehicles of fleeing civilians. Radio reports described mass evacuations from areas surrounding Los Angeles, the declaration of martial law, and conflicting radiation warnings. Sophia had expected gridlock all the way, but the lack of any vehicle but hers heading west made the drive that more unsettling. The traffic thinned as she approached LA. The further she drove, the emptier the roads became. She was alone on the freeway. A surreal experience on roadways normally congested at all hours. The emptiness carried its own warning. She was driving toward something everyone else was fleeing. Sophia's GPS had stopped working hours ago, but she didn't need it. 15 years in Los Angeles had etched these routes into her memory. Exit here, turn there, the familiar path home. As she crested the final hill that should have revealed their neighborhood, her headlights illuminated a transformed landscape. Where apartment buildings and shopping centers should have stood, there was absence, rubble, small fires, and just nothing. A perfect circle of annihilation. She pulled to the side of the road, stepping out into air that smelled wrong, like sulfur and ash and things that had no name. The evening was eerily quiet. No sirens, no voices, no wildlife, just the soft tick of her cooling engine and the blood rushing in her ears. Beyond the destruction's edge, buildings remained mostly intact, untouched save for their destroyed windows, as if a giant cookie cutter had stamped down from above, removing only what lay within its circumference. Their apartment had been 3 blocks inside what was now emptiness. Sophia walked forward in a daze, approaching the edge of obliteration. Something crunched beneath her shoes, glass fused with asphalt, transformed by unimaginable heat. The boundary between existence and nothingness was shockingly abrupt. Mark wouldn't have had time to leave home and then driven to Claire's school, she reasoned desperately. He could have left early for his regular gym workout and could have driven straight to her. Her school must be outside this circle. They could still be alive. They must be. The distant growl of engines broke the silence. Headlights swept the devastation as a convoy of military vehicles rumbled into view. Camp Pendleton Marines in full hazmat gear disembarked, moving with half-practiced efficiency. One spotted her and approached, face obscured behind a protective mask. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area. You need to evacuate immediately." The faceless Marine barked. "My family," Sophia's voice cracked. "My husband and daughter, they lived here." The soldier's posture remained tense and rigid, clearly on edge. "I'm sorry, ma'am. There were no survivors within the blast radius. Radiation levels here are dangerous. We need to leave now." "But they might not have been home," she insisted. "My daughter's school. It must be outside the blast radius. My husband might have—" "Ma'am?" The soldier cut her off, not unkindly. "Secondary evacuation sites have been established for survivors. Check there. But you can't stay here. It isn't safe." As if to emphasize his point, a radiation detector at his belt emitted a persistent clicking that grew faster as they stood talking. "Where?" she demanded. "Where are these evacuation sites?" Before he could answer, another Marine approached rapidly. "Sir, we've got missile incoming." "What?" said the first Marine. "Bogey confirmed. ETA 2 minutes." The first Marine's demeanor changed instantly. "Everyone back to your vehicles. Move, move, move." Around them, the unit scrambled into motion, abandoning whatever task had brought them to ground zero. "What's happening?" Sophia asked, fear rising anew in her chest. The Marine gripped her arm. "Another missile, headed right for us. We need to go, now." "Another?" The words died in her throat as understanding dawned. This wasn't over. "Now," the soldier urged. "Get in your car and drive east as fast as you can. Don't stop until you're at least 50 miles out." Sophia stumbled back toward her vehicle, moving on autopilot. As she reached for the door handle, some instinct made her look up. There, cutting across the darkening evening sky, was a thin, white line, like a shooting star moving in slow motion. But unlike a shooting star, it wasn't arcing away. It was descending, the third, markedly larger missile coming to finish what the first two had started. Sophia stood frozen, again at a loss for words, with her hand still extended toward her car door. The Marine shouted something at her, but his words were lost in the strange silence that had enveloped her consciousness. She watched the white line grow brighter and tracked its inevitable path toward the ruined city, toward her. In that moment, Sophia understood with perfect clarity what her mother had tried to teach her that morning. Some forces were beyond human control. Some decisions led only to different versions of the same ending. She thought of Mark and Claire. Whether they had perished already, or had they survived only to face this missile. She thought of her mother, alone in San Bernardino, watching the news and knowing her daughter would never return. Sophia's hand dropped from the car door. The approaching missile reflected in her eyes as she tilted her face skyward. There would be no scream, no lamentation, no running from what had already been decided. There was only the overwhelming weight of understanding. The nightmare wasn't over. It was only beginning. The weight of secrets. The bar was a typical rough 1970s bar on the docks of London. It was a dark bar, cigarette smoke and stale beer in the air. A neon sign buzzed at the top of the room, casting an almost ghostly red light on the scene. It was a type of bar where secrets were told, debts were paid. A type of bar where men like Marcus knew not to linger. But tonight, he had no other options. He was seated in the last booth, facing the wall, a glass of whiskey half empty in front of him. The ice long melted, the drink as watered down as his nerves. His fingers tapped nervously against the table, and his eyes flicked to the door every few minutes. She was late. Of course she was. Claire had never done anything on time. It was a power move, a thing she had mastered when they were just kids pulling jobs together, before the messy world got messier, before trust became a precious commodity neither could afford. When she actually did walk into the room, it shrunk around her. She wasn't loud, she wasn't flashy, but she had an energy that turned heads. She moved like she knew things other people didn't, like she could see the strings behind the curtain, the mechanism, and knew exactly how to pull them. She spotted him immediately, sliding into the booth across from him, a cocky little smile on her face. "I didn't actually think you'd come," Marcus muttered, taking a slow sip of his glass. Claire reclined in a cross-legged position. "You called. I was curious." That was what you could say about Claire. She didn't waste words. It was as if every sentence was measured, weighed, and heavy. Marcus rubbed his jaw, suddenly unsure how to begin. He had rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in his head, tortured himself with each word. But now, suddenly, all that preparation unraveled as he looked at her. "You don't belong here," he replied instead. Claire raised an eyebrow. And yet, here I am. She motioned to his drink. You gonna tell me why you called me out of the blue? Or are we just reminiscing? Marcus exhaled slowly. He glanced around the bar. Nobody was watching, but that didn't mean there weren't watchers. Risked a trip out here was what he'd done. Hell, even whispering Claire's name when he did what he did was a risk. But he needed a trusted person to help. Or at least not rip his head off on sight. We got a problem. I found something, he said. About the shipment. Claire's expression did not budge, nor her posture. Here she was, now listening. Really listening. Go on, she said. Marcus hesitated. This was the moment. The point of no return. He could always backpedal, feign some excuse, play like this was whatever, but he didn't. The shipment is not what they say it is, he said in a low voice. It's not weapons. Claire tilted her head slightly. Then what is it? Marcus swallowed. His heart was in his throat. He had already said too much. It's not good, Claire. He had the breath to say. Worse than anything we've ever had before. She bent forward with her elbows on the table. Marcus, her voice a silky, low drawl, steady but brittle, she said, What's in the shipment? His mouth felt dry. He glanced back at the barkeep, at the old guy behind the counter with a beer, a couple huddled away in the back. That one could be eavesdropping on us. I can't, he said finally. I've said too much, Claire sighed. You do this every time. Look at you, she said, shaking her head. You first attach, and then in the next breath, you detach without explanation. If you tell me nothing, you explain to me what the hell's going on here, or you waste my time. Marcus clenched his jaw. I'm only trying to keep you alive. Claire eyed him up and down, piercing him with her gaze. And who says I need saving? You don't understand, Marcus said, stepping closer. He dropped his voice to a whisper. This isn't just a job, Claire. This is something else. Something bigger. She didn't blink. Then explain it to me. He hesitated again. And that's when he saw it. A man in the bar, observing them from below the brim of a dark hat. He wasn't drinking. He wasn't talking. He's literally just sitting there waiting for us, he said. Marcus's stomach dropped. They weren't alone. He reclined in his seat, trying to remain calm. He drained the remainder of his whiskey, then resolutely put the glass up on the table. We're leaving, he said, almost to himself. Claire didn't argue. She just looked back and spotted the gentleman and nodded. She was up and moving before he was, gliding like a shadow while he scurried toward the door. The cool night air hit them like a slap as soon as they were outside. The streets were vacant, the city throbbing with the sort of silence that can only descend when there's danger close at hand. Well, talk, Claire said. As soon as they were out of his sight, Marcus was running a hand through his hair. Thinking. I should not have called you, he admitted. Claire grabbed his arm, halting him. Marcus, he was looking at her, truly looking at her, seeing something he hadn't allowed himself to see until now. This was more than just another job for her. It wasn't just any payday. She wanted answers, and she wasn't going to let him off the hook without having him give them to her. Marcus exhaled. The shipment, he said. It's not weapons, it's people. Claire's mask broke for the first time. What? They are actually smuggling people, Claire. And not just any people. He lowered his voice. They're selling them, like cargo. Silence. Then, who? You know the answer to that already. Claire stared at him. You're sure? Marcus nodded. She fell quiet for a long beat. Then, at last, she took a long breath out. Shit, she muttered. Marcus nodded again. Yeah, she shook her head, ran a hand through her hair. This is bad, Marcus. This is a real shit show. I know. Claire raised her head to look at him, a sharp, calculating look in her eyes. What's your plan? He hesitated. He hadn't gotten that far, but Claire had always been faster than him. I'm able. She straightened up. First thing we do is we disappear, you and me. Because if they know, you are dead already. Marcus swallowed. And then what? A smile broke across her face, an old flame bursting into life in her eyes. And then we burn them down, and at that moment, Marcus knew it was too late to go back. He had said too much, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was what needed to be said. The children of the Forsaken. The villagers called them children of the Forsaken. Those shunned to the Bear Claw Mountains, exiled from society. But the children called themselves the Watchers, for their view of the villages nestled in the valley below. And to their parents, they were merely Raya Navarium, Lilith Skyden, and Quill Weston. Who in the Risen's name takes the forest path to Bearclaw? Asks Quill, features twisting as a gentle frown and harsh laugh compete for dominance like wolves fighting over a kill. Lilith gives him the scolding look of a mother. Don't say that. Mother says it's a bad word. I heard that the Risen will come take your voice at night if you forget to say your prayers. Though the Risen, fallen dead brought to life by the god of death, Voltaram, were more myth to faithless villagers than a poor, disease-ridden harvest. Amongst the Forsaken, the ancient gods were sacred. Quill gives an assertive nod to Raya. You were brought to the Forsaken as a child. What do you think? Are we going to make another friend? Raya's features may as well have been carved from stone, like the statues of the Risen in the underground temple below their feet. Her eyes are cast on the singularity in the distance, the cloaked figures cutting through the path against a blur of wind and snow, with the relentless endurance of a river's current. Raya was only a child when she was sent to the Forsaken. But as she grew, her past came back in fragments, like the shards of a broken clay bowl she'd accidentally dropped onto her foot trying to reach the table earlier this morning. Sometimes, Raya prayed to Voltairum at night for the empty contentment of forgetting, to let her past die like all things in this world. But watching the figures, she supposed that there was a certain strength to remembering and enduring that was a part of living. I remember that the nun who heard me singing and saw me floating screamed and threw a book at me. I remember crying because I was confused more than hurt. Her face falls to her woolen boots covered in snow. I remember the thin cotton blanket that I shivered through all the way up to the mountains. I don't remember my father very much, except for the fact that he lived in a very big house and never seemed to be there. Quill squints through the haze, trying to see through the chaos of the storm. I don't see a child with them. Raya climbs atop a boulder with practiced movements, testing the heel of her boots against the stone for ice patches, and peers over the edge. I think you're right. Quill crosses his arms with false bravado. Of course I am. They're coming for us, but not for the reason we think. Raya turns to each of them and asks them the same question. How old are you? Quill is 10 years old. Lilith turns 8 next week. Raya is the oldest of them, almost 11. One of them wears the white robes of a priest. They were sent to cut our throats and take our voices too. Raya abandons her perch, staggering backwards. We're not even 16. Must have been a terrible harvest. Quill starts, before cut off by an elbow blow to his side. Lilith's voice trembles, and Raya tells herself that it is Lilith's teeth chattering from the cold, while Quill merely rubs the edges of his bony ribs. I need to tell Mother. She'll know what to do. Word of the priest's arrival and rumors about another nulling ceremony to take the voices of the children spread through the small town of Bearclaw faster than an avalanche. The children are kept safely behind locked doors and shuttered windows, while townspeople brandish an assortment makeshift weapons: knives, pickaxes, woodcutters' axes, shovels, old potions, and spell books. By the time the travelers arrive, the townspeople are ready and waiting. The children have been instructed to stay inside, stay away from the windows and door. But the coziness of the fireplace is almost stifling compared to the tenuous, cold, bitten air. Lilith turns away from the window, her eyes damp with tears. A few moments ago, her mother had forced her to look her in the eyes and wrote that if she could not be strong for herself, she must be strong for others. Her father, who mostly grunted in response to anything she said, hugged her and wrote that he loved her. Only now, Lilith started to realize that she would need to be strong for her people if her mother wasn't there to lead them. Huddled in the corner, hugging her knees against her chest, Raya tries to press her body flat against the wall to steady her trembling frame. Her mother wrote mutterings about the trouble that youth these days seem to find. Then she had stuffed firelight potions in the bag across her chest, wrapped another coat around her shoulders, and strung an amulet around her neck. Raya rubbed the markings on the rabbit bone, hoping there would be enough magic in the amulet to protect both of them. Meanwhile, Quill fights the urge to sneeze, itchiness crawling up his throat, threatening to explode. Earlier that evening, his father had taken out a gleaming, enchanted sword from a cabinet and donned the knight's armor that he'd stolen off a rotting corpse in a cave. When his father gave Quill the dagger that he used for skinning game, he wrote for Quill to protect the girls. At first, Quill wanted to point out that Lilith had been practicing her blood song, and Raya was a gifted illusionist. But taking in the hard lines of his father's saw, cast against harsh torchlight, Quill understood. His father also expected him to protect himself, prove himself. We're no priests, and we mean you no harm. The woman's weary steps sink into the snow, too loud and soft, at the same time like the toll of church bells, carried by the flurries of wind. Lilith's mother uses a pierce of charcoal to write on an empty page of her spellbook. Raya flinches at the groaning wooden beams of the cabin as the wind rattles the bolted shutters. Lilith inhales a deep, shaky breath, and Quill stifles his sneeze. I apologize for our deception. Only priests or knights are allowed to travel to the mountains. Tugging down the pristine pale cowl of his cloak, the man takes a step closer. We came here to warn you that your children are in danger. Are they well? Quill's father aims the tip of sword against the man's throat. The crowd gathered in front of the gates stands unwilling, unyielding against the wind. They lurk like a massive shadow, looming over the two strangers as the sun dips below the horizon. They want to take your children's ability to speak. As if sensing their prying eyes, watching from the window, the woman turns to the them, tugging at the man's cloak. Can we see the children? Please? Lilith's mother gestures towards Quill's father. With a heavy sigh, he drops the sword to his armored side. Raya's mother walks towards the door. All three of the children duck their heads down below the window, as if caught stealing maple sweets from the table, and glance at anywhere but each other in guilty silence. None of them flinch when there's a gentle knock against the door, as they follow Raya's mother in stunned, uncertain silence. The fickle, unruly wind seems to whisper in their place. Lilith tugs her thick cloak closer around her shoulders and straightens her shoulders to seem older than she is. Raya keeps her head lowered, focused on chasing her mother's shadow in a game of tag she's been playing since she was born. Quill trudges along, wearing his father's boots that are a few sizes too large for him. Kneeling on the snow, the woman flicks back her cowl. Her eyes are focused with concern. They said you were young, but they failed to mention you weren't old enough to bleed. Her gaze softens as she glances at Lilith. I have a daughter, Pyrrha. You remind me of her. The man turns to Quill. Do you know why we are here? Lilith glances at Quill, who in turn glances at Raya, their eyes locked in contest. A contest that Raya lost. Yes, she says, forcing the truth out of her mouth, harsh as the burning cold. A few hours ago, the priests sent knights to your village. They will arrive soon. We are offering to bring you to a safe place for a while. The woman meets Lilith's mother's gaze with deference. If your parents will allow us, Lilith's mother writes, we can protect our own. Why should we trust the kindness of a villager? Then Raya's mother follows. How do we know they will be safe with you? Quill's father hesitates before adding, where will you take them? When will we be able to see them again? The rest of the crowd lift their spell books in the air. Messages scrawled in crooked, furious strokes that reminded Raya of the warning signs written with animal blood and placed before the forest path. You take our voices, our magic, and now you want our children? Leave. You are not welcome here. Lilith tugs on her mother's tunic sleeve, insistent, like a furry blood moon moth drawn to a candle. They're only trying to help. That's what the priests say, replies Quill, with an annoyed scoff. Rhea closes her eyes, trying to put up a mental fortress around her mind, blocking out the argument. She still remembered the long, tortuous walk from the church orphanage as she left the village. A man smelling faintly of bread spat on her feet. Someone wearing a silk dress called her a sorcerer, slut. When she tripped and fell on her feet, a rosy-cheeked child took the opportunity to throw rotten fruit at her back. Despite having a priest for company, Raya knew that she was alone. But when she opens her eyes again, the memory of the villagers fade, and all Raya sees are two people who ventured through the cold wilderness to protect 3 children they'd never met from knights. Standing alone, Raya addresses the crowd. I think that they've come all this way. We should at least hear what they have to say. My wife, Vea, has a sister that lives in a cottage on the other side of the sea in Whaley's Fair. Your children would be staying there. You could come visit whenever you wished, so long as you were not followed by knights. The man takes a step away from the crowd, giving them some privacy. Whatever your choice may be, we will understand. His eyes turn far more distant than the few paces between them. We know the loss of being separated from a child. as heated conversations fade to concerned murmurs, leaving torn messages from spellbooks crumpled and discarded in the snow. The parents turn to their children. One last message. It is your choice. Raya, Lilith, and Quill glance at each other, silently coming to an agreement. We'll go. The villagers called them children of the Forsaken, those exiled from society and their home in the Bear Claw Mountains. But the children called themselves the Watchers for their view of what others sometimes fail to see. To those who knew them, they were merely Raya Navarium, Lilith Skyden, and Quill Weston, the children who defied the silence of death like the Risen. I dreamed of heaven. There's a smell to death. And I'm not talking about the stench of rotting fat and escaping gases. It's the smell of death's presence. It changes the air molecules to make them sour. They slice your nose as you inhale, and they grate against your skin as you walk through its cloud. The effect lingers. The more bodies, the more intense it is. Like a heat map of last breaths, there wasn't a pure atom in the basement. It was suffocating. I was sitting against the wall, my dead eyes pointed to the sky, and my dropped chin pointed to Earth's core. My hands were blue, and my face was pale. My legs were twisted in such an uncomfortable way, but there was nothing I could do. Literally. I couldn't even breathe because there was no breath to circulate, and my blood could no longer flow because most of it was on the wall. So it seemed that I would be uncomfortable for eternity. But what's new? Even when I used to lay in the most comfortable position on a bed of clouds and fat puppies, it would only take an hour before I was forced to move again. Comfort is only a distant hope, after all, occasionally swooping down to give us a kiss on the cheek, only to fly away again. It offered a good chase, at least, but now it's gone, and it's never coming back. I can see its wings flap and flap, but its image only shrinks. Goodbye, little bird, and so my legs will stay. I don't even know who these people are next to me, beyond being an undesirable, of course. I always thought it would be my wife or children. Hell, even a neighbor in their place. But who are they? I don't know them. I've never seen them in my life, except maybe a passing glance or so. And yet, here they are. No one would ever want to imagine their coffin being shared with strangers. It's not fitting, I'll tell you that. And who pulled the trigger? I didn't recognize any of them either. When a man is put in such a position as I, isn't the smallest, most bare minimum honor you could give him is to at least let him see a familiar face before the black veil is draped. Even a simple photograph would suffice. Does their cruelty know no bounds? And what a disgusting day for it to happen. A clear, warm week ahead without a cloud on the radar. Yet they chose the only stormy day as the day. The rapping of the rain against the basement window was incredibly distracting, and all I had to do was stand still. I can't imagine the ruckus for the men with the job, but alas, it goes how it goes, just as it always does. Nothing new, nothing new. When my consciousness expired, there was a very bright light, just as you're told that you would see. It was like I was tied to the nose of a rushing train that was exiting a tunnel. I wasn't scared. I was intrigued, I suppose, but weary. It didn't seem like the light was growing as you'd expect, but it was still clear that we were bound to collide. And so we did. I then entered a still ocean, hovering over it, as if I was sitting on top of a floating rug. I looked around, and there was nothing that rose above the floor of shimmering water, completely level. I waited for some sort of figure to appear, an angel or guide, but no one came. I was alone. There was a thick white fog, more of a cream color, actually, and it was smothering everything, especially the horizon. The sky was the same color. I suppose it was more of a calm mist than a fog, if that makes sense. I stayed above the water, simply watching the mist, and I found myself entirely at peace. There was no tension or wonder. It felt right, natural, ethereal. Then the day succumbed to a wicked night. Everything was dark and ugly. But something in me knew everything was there, just as it was earlier. The water danced in an invisible moonlight, and due to the darkness, it was no longer water, but an eerie liquid. For the first time, I became aware of the possibility that the liquid might touch me, and it was terrifying. I couldn't say why. It's the same experience as seeing a familiar item in your bedroom turn into a demon when the lights go off. You know what it is and what it isn't, but you have nothing to prove it. And so, it was a demon. I found myself on the run again, but the reins were still out of my control. I soared through the dark mist to a sort of cave with a light echoing from its depths. Yet this light was only an illuminance in its vibrancy and not color. It was blacker than anything else in sight. You could shine the most intense beam of real-world light into the cave's exhaust, and the darkness would devour every ounce of it. There was no overshadowing its power. I was slurped into this cave like blood down a drain. And when I woke, I was surrounded by 4 things. They were human in their shape and size, but their faces and direct appearance were revolting, like bloody brain matter paired with the sensation of swallowing a razor blade. It's impossible to convey their grotesqueness, and they were in pain, They were suffering, whatever they were. I was lying flat on the cave floor, looking at them, all standing over me. They were studying me in teary-eyed horror. Just as I studied them, they were afraid and sad and grossed out. I was a brutal crime scene, and they were an innocent child. Their spirits yearned for an opportunity of hesitation, while their bodies functioned autonomously. They lifted me up like I was in a stretcher. Then they carried me through the cave, mostly keeping their vision to their path of travel, but occasionally sneaking a glance against their will at whatever I was to them. They placed me on a cold table and backed off, fighting themselves to sever the tie between their eyes and me. Then they were gone. All I could see was a wet cave ceiling. I knew a figure was next to me. I closed my eyes. It rolled its feet as it moved along my left side, doing seemingly nothing other than being present and busy. I don't know if it wanted me to open my eyes. It dared me to, but I would never. The ringing of complete silence was giving me the feeling of a terrible migraine. I couldn't relax because the figure was there, so I stayed alert and ready, as if there were some sort of instructions to be heard or questions to be asked. But there were none. No sound, no feel, only dread. Something was coming. Something was going to happen. It was racing to me. But there was nothing outside of the expectation of it to tell me. The figure paced. I didn't know what the figure looked like, and I would never dare to satisfy that curiosity. It wanted me to see it so that it could punish me, like a bully hovering in your peripheral vision, waiting for you to make eye contact so it could warrant abuse. But the figure, what abuse was in its arsenal? I was inflating with the shivers of dread, the heat of its vibrations cooking me like a bowl of popcorn. The figure was by my feet, my unprotected, naked feet. It wasn't doing anything yet, but of course, it was getting ready for something. Something big. I never realized how soft and sensitive the skin on my feet was until then. I expected the Lord to be here, but he wasn't. What are the rules if the rules I lived by didn't work? I don't even know if I had skin or a body or anything other than my perception. I would never open my eyes to see. If my skin was still attached, it must have shaken itself loose by now. Trembles of this magnitude would bring down even the strongest city. It's on my right side now. What's it doing there? Why there? My left side is empty, exposed, naked. There's fidgeting behind me. Metallic clinking, shuffling. But it's delicate and gentle. There's no rush to it, like an assassin taking his time to thread on a suppressor. His mind is in the clouds, and his hand is on the gun. How could one smile in a time such as that. The figure isn't smiling, though, I'm sure. It's all business for it, nothing more. A freezing chill tickles my scalp, near where the figure is hovering. What is it doing? Wait. It left. There's no door to close, but some sort of barrier is now between it and me. It's gone, but I can still feel it moving through the cave, as if I have a map of its layout. I'm alone. My eyes will stay shut. I've decided it. I'm not risking it. Not for anything. It'll come back. The figure, it'll come back without a doubt. It's getting something for me. I know it. But what? Or is that it? Is it done? Or will there be more? Has it even started yet? What is it? I don't know anything, but I know enough to not be ignorant. There's something coming. It's on its way. But why am I here? What is here? Does everyone go here? Oh, it's back. The figure is back, haunting. Jack couldn't speak. He could only scream as he woke up to the sound of his mother's voice, whispering to him from the corner of his dark bedroom. Of course, it wasn't actually his mother. He knew that. How could it be when she had died in a car accident just a little over a week earlier? Jack. Come over here, Jack. You can see me, can't you? Come over here, child. His chest was heavy, his bladder loose with fear. Looking over into the corner as he flailed amidst his perspiration-damp sheets, he realized that he could indeed see something. The same something, in fact, that he had seen on that terrible night of his mum's demise, just minutes after his aunt, who had been babysitting him at the time, had received the phone call that would cause both of their worlds to come crashing down. She had broken the news to him, and he had seen it standing over by the window of his aunt's tiny living room. It had been at the funeral, too. And now, here it was again, invading the privacy of his bedroom this time, lurking in the corner, watching him, taunting him by speaking with his dead mother's voice. Jack! Come here, Jack! Now, tears of terror spilled down his cheeks as he scrambled to sit up. His gaze was fixed upon the corner, on the hulking, dark outline of a man who stood there, wide and tall, so tall that its head almost brushed the ceiling. It had no face, no features. It was only visible because somehow it was even blacker than the darkness itself which suffused the room. Blacker than the very night. How could that be? His screams tapered off as his throat constricted. From elsewhere in the house, he could hear the sound of frantic movements. His aunt had clearly been roused by his yells. Her footsteps raced across the landing, old floorboards groaning loudly. I'll return, Jack. You can't avoid me forever. His mother's voice hissed quietly. The thing then scuttled, spider-like, across to the wall. and then through it, as though no barrier existed at all, as though the laws of physical matter simply did not matter to it one bit. The thing disappeared from his sight just as the bedroom door was flung open and the light snapped on to dazzle him with its bright glare. Jack, are you all right? His Aunt Alice stood there, looking pale and startled. Her resemblance to his mum, as always these days, struck him like a dagger through the heart. They had the same raven hair, just as he did himself. The same ice blue eyes, same sharp cheekbones, same thin lips. His mother's now stilled forever, whilst his aunt's were pinched in a worried frown as she approached the bed where he lay. Sweetheart, what is it? Did you have a bad dream? He shook his head. It was bad, all right, but it was no dream. He raised a trembling hand to point over at the corner where the thing had been standing, mocking him by its mimicking of his dead mother's voice as it tried to lure him in. Alice turned to look, but quickly brought her attention back to him. There's nothing there, Jack. You just had a nightmare, that's all. Her gaze shifted, moving down over his sheets, where a damp stain alerted him also to the fact that he must have wet himself. He cringed, the tears coursing faster down his cold cheeks. What kind of a 12-year-old wet the bed? It's all right, his aunt soothed. I'll get those in the wash, and you can come and sleep with me in my bed for the rest of the night. It'll be dawn in a couple of hours anyway. And so saying, she ushered him out of his bed and took his hand to lead him over to her room. As always, it smelled strongly of lavender. After tucking him in, she retreated back to strip the damp sheets from his bed. Meanwhile, he lay there, alone once more in the darkness, eyes wide open and frantically scanning the dark shapes all around him, lest the shadow should return again that night to torment him. All the while, the sound of his aunt's stifled sobs haunted his ears. Chanta, Abby, if you can hear me, please respond. I don't know what to do. He hasn't spoken a word since you died, and he seems so disturbed. He's been having night terrors, and Jack crept down the stairs, being careful to avoid the creaking steps. His skin was crawling, body covered in goosebumps, not from the cold, but from a renewed sense of fear. Peering over the banister, he saw his aunt in the living room. She was sitting with her back to him, cross-legged on the floor beside the coffee table. On the table itself, right in front of her, was a board, a wooden board with letters and numbers on its surface, the exact same kind of board as he remembered seeing his mother messing around with so many times before, late in the evenings after she'd had a bottle of wine. Abby, Are you here with us? Please, Gyan. He wanted to run down the remainder of the steps, grab that board, and smash it to pieces, or burn it to ashes. For there was something about it that just seemed so very, very wrong. He was stopped in his tracks, however, by a sudden, sharp gasp from his aunt. She had her fingers resting on top of a small, circular piece of glass, which rested atop the board. And as he watched, the piece of glass slid free of Alice's grip and went spinning away, clearly moving of its own volition. It raced in jagged lines all across the board. Jack felt dizzy at what he was seeing. His legs gave way beneath him as he sank down onto one of the steps, his buttocks slamming painfully hard against the bare wood. Candlelight leapt in the room before him, the multiple flames flickering wildly. A muffled groan rumbled deep in his chest. Alice did not turn around. She was far too intent upon whatever message was being spelled out to hear him. He watched as she snatched up a nearby notebook and pen, scribbling frantically as she noted down what she was seeing reveal itself before her, never taking her eyes off the board. Eventually, the glass fell still. Something stirred in the air. The candle stuttered. His aunt gave a shiver, and Jack watched as the shadow man emerged through the closed door into the kitchen, moving to stand right beside Alice, reaching out with one of its thick arms as though to touch her. Another gust of wind blew through the room, carrying on it the stench of something rotting. Unable to take it anymore, Jack scrambled to his feet and ran back up the stairs. He cowered in his aunt's bed, covers pulled up over his head. As in the room below, he heard her begin to scream.
You don't like me. When you look in your mirror, surely you tell yourself you are beautiful. Oh, I am very sure you often tell yourself that. Do you admire your fit body after the gym and tell yourself you are perfect? Or at least think you are? The feeling of rejection followed him throughout his life. It was there when school children pushed him and laughed at his looks. His face wasn't horrific, but it had imperfections. A slightly crooked nose, uneven skin tone, eyes that always seemed tired. The children called him monster, mocking him mercilessly. He wore glasses and a fixed brace for his teeth. He never had any friends. He always sat alone in the back of the classroom, trying to hide from a world that didn't want him. His mother was the only person who loved him, or so she claimed. She told him not to listen to what others said, that people are cruel. But her words were not enough. When she died, he was left alone. Loneliness became a constant in his life, deep and heavy like a stone choking him. Years later, technology offered him a new chance. On social media, no one needed to see his face right away. He could carefully choose his words, write messages that were thoughtful, kind. For a moment, he believed he could find someone who would understand him. But the responses were always the same. Sorry, you're not my type. Please don't message me again. You're creepy. Each message was another blow. He tried again, each time hoping for a different outcome. But they all rejected him, and their words were like poison chilling his blood. One night, as he sat at his computer reading another rejection message, something in him snapped. His hands trembled as he closed his laptop. "Why?" he whispered, addressing the empty room. His voice was quiet, but it trembled with anger. Why me? The world didn't want him. That was now clear. But he no longer wanted them. They had made him this way, and he would no longer beg. He didn't have to belong to their world. The idea was faint at first, like a shadow on the edge of consciousness. But as the days passed, it became clearer. He began to imagine a perfect being, someone who would never reject him, someone who wouldn't see his imperfections. In his mind, everything became clearer. Every woman he had ever seen had something special. Eyes, smile, hands, legs. He could combine all those perfect parts into one being. The first victim was a girl he had watched in a store. Her eyes were incredible, deep blue, almost unreal. He had followed her for days, studying her habits. He noticed she always took the same path home, a dark alley behind a building. One night, as the rain lightly fell, he waited in the shadows. His heart raced as he gripped the knife in his pocket. When she appeared, her steps were quiet, but they echoed in his head. He approached from behind, his hand trembling as he drew the knife. It all happened quickly. Her body fell onto the concrete with a dull thump. He carried her to his basement, avoiding streetlights. His body was tense, his heart pounding in his chest, but he felt something akin to excitement. In the basement, under the dim light of a bulb, he sat at a table. Her eyes were fixed on him, lifeless, yet still perfect. With surgical precision, he removed them and prepared them. When he placed them on the face of the doll, he experienced a joy he had never felt before. "Perfect," he whispered, looking at the doll that had just received its first aspect of perfection. His obsession grew with each new victim. After the first, he felt an indescribable relief. The doll, although still incomplete, now had eyes that radiated perfection. But it wasn't enough. He knew he had to continue. Every night he left his house, choosing carefully. Each woman had something he deemed worthy. Sometimes he sat in cafes, quietly observing passers-by. His eyes focused on the minute details, the shape of fingers, the line of a neck, a perfect smile. The second victim was a woman with beautiful hands. Her fingers, long and delicate, were like instruments that captivated his attention. He followed her for several days, studying her habits. He realized she always went to a small shop at the end of the street on Thursdays, always alone. The preparation was perfect. That evening, he waited around the corner where the lamp's light didn't reach. When she walked past him, he quickly grabbed her. Her body was light, her resistance weak. Her hands were now part of his puzzle. When he returned to the basement, he felt joy as he assembled parts of the doll. The fingers fit perfectly onto the body he was carefully constructing. He sat for hours, watching his work. "It's getting closer," he whispered to himself. The third victim was a woman with a smile that captivated him. Her lips were shaped as if always ready to smile. He followed her as she walked her dog in the park, noting every detail of her face. The basement windows were closed, covered with layers of old newspapers and sticky tape. Light only came from a single bulb hanging on a cable above a table covered with blood-stained cloths and scalpels arranged in perfect order. The floor was covered with a plastic sheet that crackled under his steps. The basement was his refuge, a place where the world couldn't find him. In the basement, his work began to take shape. Each body part was carefully chosen and joined with precision. The doll now had eyes, hands, lips, even hair, all parts of his vision of perfection. Every evening, he sat beside her, talking to her. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, as he recounted events from the past. He told her about school days when he was the subject of ridicule, about days when he was invisible to everyone except those who wanted to hurt him. He had to continue to complete his creation. He enjoyed the company of his perfect masterpiece. Soon he found many more victims to add even more perfect female parts. He was captivated. With a smile, he talked to her about life. She listened silently and watched him with her deep blue eyes. His steps echoed through the quiet streets. As he watched passers-by, every detail on their bodies was potential. The shape of hands, the line of a jaw, the curve of a neck, all had the potential to become part of his vision. His latest target was not random. She was a woman he had seen at the bus stop every evening. Her hair, light like gold, fell over her shoulders, and her hands were gentle yet strong. In her eyes, he saw the peace he lacked. He followed her carefully from a distance, studying every move she made. In her, he saw the key to completing his creation. The basement had become everything to him. The thick, cold walls retained the sense of his deeds, the smells of decay, chemicals, and metal. On the table, tools lay in perfect order. The scalpel was the most important, sharp, precise. As he worked, he felt like an artist. His hands were steady, his movements careful. The doll was becoming his only truth, the only thing that gave him a sense of purpose. As he sat in front of his creation, he felt he had reached the pinnacle, but that perfection did not bring peace. His pain did not disappear. The doll could not speak, could not provide what he truly lacked: love. The decay was unbearable. The doll, his masterpiece, began to decompose before his eyes. The smell seeped into every pore, and the body parts, once perfect, now became shadows of what they had been. "Why?" he whispered, as he sat on the chair, head bowed. "Why can't I keep what is perfect?" As he sat beside his doll, he watched as the light from the bulb fell on her unnaturally white eyes that once were blue. He spoke to her softly, almost tenderly, as if to someone who understood all his pains. "You are the only thing in this world that is true," he said. "But the world does not allow perfection. Everything that is beautiful, everything that has value, they destroy it." The light went out, but the silence didn't bring peace. The doll remained motionless as the darkness of the basement enveloped its body. In that darkness, the only sound was his breathing, uneven, heavy, as if each breath carried the weight of years of pain. The light went out, but the silence didn't bring peace. The doll remained motionless as the darkness of the basement enveloped its body. In that darkness, the only sound was his breathing, uneven, heavy, as if each breath carried the weight of years of pain. He sat across from the doll, leaning on a chair that creaked under his weight. He looked at it, at the eyes he had chosen so carefully, at the hands he had joined with precision, at the smile that once seemed to him like the answer to all his unspoken prayers. But now, in the darkness, the silence gave him no solace. "Why is everything I touch doomed to ruin?" he muttered, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. The silence didn't soothe him. On the contrary, it grew louder. In it, he could hear every unspoken reproach of the world that had rejected him. He heard the voices of the girls who mocked him, the whispers of children who ridiculed him, the words women sent him on social media. "You're creepy. You're not my type. Please don't message me again." Those words, buried deep in his mind, echoed as his hands trembled on his knees. The doll was now complete, but the emptiness within him grew larger. He felt that space devouring him from the inside, as if even all the body parts he had so carefully selected couldn't fill what he lacked. "You are everything I ever wanted," he whispered, addressing it. His eyes were full of tears that couldn't fall. "But why do I still feel this way?" He raised his hand and gently touched its face. It was cold, rigid, motionless. There was no life in it. "Is this all I have?" The silence didn't answer. That night, he sat in the basement as hours passed. He stared into the darkness, thinking about every moment of his life, about every glance that passed over him as if he didn't exist, about every judgment and every rejection. "If perfection doesn't exist," he said quietly to himself, "then what is left for me?" He closed his eyes. His hands slipped off his knees, and his head fell back. The darkness enveloped him completely as his world grew quieter than ever before. Several hours passed. The basement was filled with silence, but it was no longer the same. It was thicker, heavier, pressing down on every part of his body. His breathing became slower, quieter, as he silently repeated the sentences he often said. "You are everything I ever wanted," he whispered. His voice was now lifeless, as though it shattered against the basement walls and immediately vanished. He reached out toward the doll and touched its face. The surface was cold, almost hostile, and for a moment it felt like it was rejecting him. He pulled his hand back, like a child recoiling from a flame. "You were supposed to love me," he said louder. His eyes, now dry, stared into its eyes, empty, lifeless, full of reflections of everything he had lost. In the doll, he saw himself. Every piece had been chosen to create perfection, but now he understood that perfection was nothing but an illusion. His creation was a reflection of himself, stitched together from fragments that could never be whole. "I gave everything for you," he whispered, lowering his head into his hands. "Everything I had, I gave." But in the silence of the basement, he began to understand the truth. The doll couldn't love him because it had no soul, and she, like him, was nothing but emptiness. Memories began to flood over him. He saw his mother gently hugging him, telling him not to pay attention to what others thought. He remembered her smile, the last smile he had ever felt as genuine. "Where are you now?" he whispered into the darkness. But that smile had been lost long ago, just like everything else. The doll couldn't love him, the world couldn't love him, and he could no longer love himself. The silence became unbearable. The emptiness inside him was too vast. His hand moved toward the light switch but didn't turn it on. Instead, he sank to the floor, leaning against the wall, and closed his eyes. As he sat in the dark, he realized there were no more answers. The doll, his only companion, stood motionless, a shadow in the darkness. His sigh rose softly, but it wasn't a prayer or a threat. It was the end. "You think you are perfect?" he said for the last time. His voice was weak, almost extinguished. "You are wrong. Perfection doesn't exist."
Car radio. The silence is deafening. Finley stares at the empty slot where the radio should be. The hole in the center console mocks him. The engine roars and jumps to life. Finley laughs at the power and presses the gas pedal. The engine responds and races down the street. He sighs and shrugs off the silence. At least it's a nice car, he thinks to himself. Finley grips the steering wheel tighter and continues to drive. He's never driven a convertible before. The large amount of snacks sits in the passenger seat. 3 bags of chips, several candy bars, a meat stick, a couple of grape sodas, Red Bull, and an orange Gatorade are piled into a small mountain next to Finley. There is also $437 in his pocket. Finley glances at the convenience store in the rear view mirror as he drives away. The gun wasn't loaded, but the clerk behind the desk didn't need to know that. She graciously gives up her drawer in exchange for her life. Finley smiles as the memory of the robbery passes through his head again. "Everything in the drawer, now," he shouts. The clerk cries, but nods in understanding and opens the register. Ding. This is much easier with a gun, thinks Finley. He grins under his mask. He holds the basket of snacks in his free hand and points the gun at the clerk. Ida is the name on her shirt. She's short with straight black hair and small eyes. Tears run down her cheeks as she collects the bills. With a shaky hand, she gives the money to Finley. "Thank you," Finley decides to say. He runs out the store and watches as a Chevrolet Corvette pulls up to the store. An older gentleman shuts off the engine and opens the door to get out. He sees the gun before he sees Finley. "Give me the keys," Finley says loudly to the man. The elderly man jumps in surprise and quickly hands the keys to Finley. Finley dumps the basket of snacks into the passenger seat, puts the car in reverse, and drives down the road. When he is clear of the scene, he pulls off his mask and tosses it on the floor. He goes to adjust the radio, but the dial isn't there. The whole compartment is empty. Finley is an average man with an average build. His curly locks meet his eyebrows and licks his earlobes. His eyes are wide and too big for his narrow face, close together with long lashes. Stubble on his chin creeps its way up to his sideburns. The long bridge of his nose flares into broad nostrils, and his big pink lips pushes out from his face. He has a birthmark in the shape of a small diamond under his left eye. His cheeks are freckled and covered with a thin layer of dirt. Finley prefers Xbox over PlayStation and drinks apple juice more than a grown man should. He hates roller coasters because he has to sit next to strangers. He loves school, but dropped out his senior year. Finley is passionate, creative, and extremely intelligent. Finley wasn't always a thief, but the worst in his life brings out the best in him. Did I forget to feed Edison? Finley thinks to himself. Edison is his pet goldfish, who spends his days in a sphere on Finley's nightstand. Finley's hamster died in a freak vacuum accident when he was in kindergarten, and since then, he was against pets. Edison was a prize Finley had reluctantly won at a carnival. So far, he's lasted over a year and tripled in size. Finley tugs nervously at his Iron Maiden shirt as he passes a cop. He checks his speed and cautiously pulls the seatbelt over his chest and clicks it into place. He thinks, "Don't pull me over, please." He isn't ready to deal with the police. He hasn't thought this far ahead. The officer turns left and into a gas station. Finley sighs, relief, and looks back at where the radio should be. It's too quiet for him. His thoughts float carelessly through his head. He pictures himself as a police officer for a moment and laughs at the thought. If his dad was around, or if his mother stopped drinking, if his brother never beat him, and if he stayed in school. He wondered where his life would have been then. What kind of person he would be now. An outstanding citizen, he imagines, with a wife and kids. He creates the vision of his family in his head. A woman with large breasts and red hair. 2 kids, 1 boy and 1 girl, with toothless smiles on their dirty faces. They would be soccer players, like Finley was, and always outside. He shakes off the thought. Sucks not having a radio, he thinks. He sits up taller in the driver's seat and lets out a little scream. Ah! He relaxes and slumps back into his seat. He tries to whistle and fails, only allowing air to escape his pursed lips. He blows a tune through his teeth and grunts in frustration. I wish I knew how to whistle. Both my parents could. Even Franklin can, he says in his head. He tries again, and a small tweet of a sound flies from in between his lips. He grins at his small accomplishment. I hate tuna fish, he thinks. Finley starts to space out behind the wheel. The lack of sound tricks his brain. He visualizes a concert he went to last year. He remembers all the pockets he picked and wallets he stole. He made 5 times the amount of the cost of the tickets he paid for, but wasn't able to enjoy the concert properly. The songs of the band echoes throughout his mind. He taps the steering wheel to the beat of the song stuck in his head. He hums the melody. He looked back at the center console and sighed loudly. There wasn't even a clock. What time is it? He wondered. I should have stolen a watch. Or a car with a radio. The car was quiet. Even the purr of the engine was hushed. Everything is still, except the thoughts in Finley's head. He thinks about the graduation he never attended, the smell of his last girlfriend right before she walked out the door, the taste of sea salt ice cream and how it was superior to any other flavor. He pictures the last family photo they had together when times were good. How Franklin had his arm around him in a rare, loving embrace. It is loud in Finley's head, and there is no sound to hide behind. He groans and tries to shake off all his thoughts, clear his head. It's no use. The thoughts always come back, stronger and louder than before. He is going mad from the silence. I can pull the steering wheel. It would be easy to wreck such a nice car. The guardrail teases Finley. He envisions the crash in his head and plays out the scene slowly. The metal twisted around the body of the convertible, the popped wheel and broken windshield. He shakes off the thought and continues driving, now upset by the concept he created in his mind. He can't distract himself from himself. There was nothing to drown out his perception of his own ideations. He can't clear his head. He's trapped within himself. Finley screams and pulls the car over. The wheels spin angrily against the dirt on the shoulder. He bangs the steering wheel with a fist and groans. He hears the sound of sirens and looks in the mirror. He didn't notice the police officer that pulled a U-turn at the last intersection. He didn't see the car behind him, getting closer and closer. He watches as a police officer steps out of his squad car and aims a gun at his Corvette. Now what? This isn't part of his plan. He licks his lips and glares at his new challenge. He throws the car into drive and slams on the gas pedal. The car lurches forward and spins wildly back on the road. The cop calls it in and drives after Finley. The two-lane road was barren. The twists and turns makes Finley feel he was back on a roller coaster without the strangers. The contents of his stomach sloshes around. Well, this is great. He wanders ahead, trying to come up with a plan. He didn't know these streets that well, and another police car pulls up alongside Finley. He kicks up the speed and lets out a yelp as the car responds. They race down the street. The sirens blare loudly. Finley watches as the police cars serve and drive around each other like synchronized swimmers after him. These guys are good, but not as good as me. I need to lose them. He thinks about car chase videos he's watched online and in movies. The bad guy always gets caught somehow, with some small mistake he plans to avoid. He turns down a dirt road quickly, but the cars behind don't falter and follow him. The dirt is slick on the wheels, and with the sharp turn, he flips the car. He curses himself as the car rolls into the ditch upside down. The sound of scrapping metal pierces his ears. It's quiet for a moment as the dust settles. He wasn't going to get caught. Especially now, they will find out exactly how many people he's robbed. He isn't planning on going to jail. Edison would miss him. "Step out of the vehicle with your hands in the air," the officer shouts, spit flying out of his mouth. They were behind open car doors, ready for Finley to react. Finley's heart races as his hands went for the unloaded gun. "You'll never take me alive, coppers," he shouts in his mind. He smiles. He was on the track and field team in high school. Surely he could outrun the police. He's done it before with success. He pushes the car door open, and without thinking, Finley hops out the car and runs, pointing the gun behind him. His feet slip on the loose gravel, but he collects himself and moves his feet fast underneath him. He takes 3 more steps away from the police, gun heavy in his hands. Bang! The silence is deafening.